You're in for a good one today, guys. The next episode of the Mindrise Podcast, I am joined by my good friend Craig Honeycutt, who is the founder of Aim Upward, an executive coaching business. And he's had an interesting start to life. He started off as a musician of the hit band Everything, that was best known for their song Who Got the Hooch. I'm sure you could trace that back to your college days. And he and I are talking about reinvention and the power of reinvention and the pathways to reinvention and the pitfalls of reinvention. Reinvention isn't for the faint of heart, but it is accessible to you. So join me on this next episode of the Mindrise Podcast. And I can't wait to hear your feedback in the comments. Welcome to the Mindrise Podcast, the catalyst that takes you from who you are right now to all that you can become. But no, I'm super excited to talk today about reinvention. This has been a concept that I have talked with plenty of my clients about, and talked to you about several times in the parking lot of school, and coming to that place of, I mean, I find it so interesting because I think that there's a permission slip involved to give ourselves the permission to reinvent. But I think that the story starts much earlier than even the awareness that it's time to reinvent. So I'm curious for you, like, where has reinvention shown up in your life? Take us in
Where has it not? Where
a
has it not? So you talked about the permission slip in my band days. So we'll get to that. So being a musician and an artist, reinvention is just going to be part of the matrix. It's not only just reinvention, it's just reinvention at pace and multiple times. And we'll get to that. But do you remember the Beastie Boys? Do
course,
you,
of course.
right? Do you
Yes.
remember the License to Ill? Um, that's back in the band days when you give somebody a license to ill, that's the permission slip. And always along the way in a journey of discovery, I've always found people that I've encountered who will just say something at the right time, and it's just like, oh, no, you're right. Like, duh, of course. And it's like, oh, they just gave you a license to ill. And so that's what we talk about, like the permission slip is like you give yourself a license to ill, right? Because at the end of the day, like we all end up not making it out of here, right? Like we are here for a finite amount of time, so like get after it. And I think that, there's questions of stability in there and safety and having enough and those kinds of things that are at play as well. Um, so let me pause there for a second. Do you have any reflections for me?
No, I'm loving it because I think you're right. We are here for a finite amount of time, but also, Craig, I've found, just as being a human, is that we can have a tendency, humans, all of us, me included, that when we're in the blender of it, I think we forget that we have such a finite amount of time. So we have a tendency to sweat the small stuff, make mountains out of molehills, whatever phrase you want to throw at it. But I'm curious, like, how did you adopt this lens of having a deep understanding that, like, our time is finite here, and what are we going to do with it?
Sure. Right. So I have pushed the envelope is what I've done. So I was driven as a young person to just accomplish something, right? Big stages. I was precocious. I was really great on stage. I have enough talent that I started writing songs when I was 12. I just started producing music. And in college, I put a band together because I was convinced that that's what I was going to do. And that's what I did. So by the time I graduated from JMU in 1992, I was a 220 day a year musician on the road with the band Everything. We scraped and clawed our way through the chicken finger circuit through the Southeast and the Mid Atlantic, and it just kept growing. And we were part of the 90s, which was do it yourself, right? Make your own CDs, make your own mailing list, start using email in 1993. We just leveraged all of the digital tools, and it's anything you could do to, like, quote, make it. So I learned the entrepreneurial spirit by just going all in. And, the whole idea of like burning the boats, I look back on my life and I realized in my 20s, I burnt the boats and there was no going back. Once you've sort of become feral, there's no going back. And every time I've tried to plug into regular society looks at me and it's just like, what are you doing here? Like, what's going on there? And so, I went on the ride and I had some success in the music industry. I had a really big hit song. So I experienced the zeitgeist of fame briefly. I had friends of mine become household names, and I was willing to just throw all of myself at that thing. What I learned was that it is a big, gnarly world out there, and that the wheel of fortune is ruthless. And I found myself at the end of my ride in a way that I was not anticipating. And so I was forced into a reinvention process because when your star is rising, it is intoxicating. When it falls, when you don't have the juice, that's a weird spot. And that's why you see celebrities acting weird because they're constantly clawing for the juice, right? And it's an illusion. And I went through a lot of a very long and slow and difficult ego death, right? That's what it was, but I was battling for a long time with it. So I was forced to, now what? And so then it's like, okay, what do I have at my disposal? How do I get to another? How do I turn from a record producer into a sound designer? And I just went on that adventure and I was very lucky. So I just went through so much change because I'm a creative person. So I leveraged the artist's path, which is essentially an entrepreneurial path, which is a path of accelerated learning to try to figure out what's in front of you. It helps to have a mission, right? What do I really believe in? So I was out in the wilderness for a while because my mission was really probably just to learn and go through some hard times so I could be a wiser, gentler human. So I just have hit the crossroads a lot harder and faster than other people, and have learned along the way. And I've had a lot of really good allies and friends and family around me that have supported me at my lowest points. And eventually things started to evolve in a way where I realized, like, oh, I understand how to do this. And so now, as a coach, I'm great at listening to people because I'm a songwriter, which means I listen to people. And because I've been through the reinvention stage so many times, I'm really good at talking with people who are at that phase, especially people who have had their act together and through whether it's COVID or something in their family, or they just hit the wall, they're at a crossroads and they're taking it personally, right? They're having to go through their own ego death, right? And so that's a little bit of the background. I mean, I think if you're an artist and you're going to try to quote, make it in the music industry, you're just, man, you are in the Delta,
Well,
right?
so I feel like you've given us two lenses about reinvention that are important because again, I'm not a big believer in a one size fits all, and
Mhm.
you don't strike me that way either. So I hear the reinvention as like as an artist, as a musician, you're constantly reinventing yourself by way of the art, right?
Right.
Pursuing the sound, the experience, the connection, and so forth. And I feel like that pursuit feels, maybe I'm not going to have the right words for it because it's your lived experience, but I feel like that pursuit feels like at your own hand, right? It's like, okay, well, I'm reinventing because I'm going to change the way that this song sounds, or I'm going to change the approach here, or we're doing something different on stage. And then I'm also hearing a secondary experience you've had with reinvention, which was the ego death, which can, to your point, sometimes feel like falling off a cliff.
Right.
You don't know who you are or what's going on, and you're just trying to pull at any thread that there is. And sometimes that's the, and again, I want to hear your words and your perspective, but I think that sometimes that's the one where we're like, is there a bottom here? What am I doing? How long am I going to fall for? Like, what in the hell is happening? So I'm
Right.
curious, like, I mean, I'm sure there's multiple paths for reinvention, but those are the two that I really hear you saying, the one that's at your hand and the one that's not quite at your hand, and
Right.
an ego death.
Right. I mean, that's a huge one. So, um, because I was so all in, it's like kind of like being a Formula One driver. Like you're not thinking about what's next. Because if you do, then it's kind of like you're not totally all in, which is the irony, right? You kind of have to be a little insane to do it all in. But that's the romance of it, is to just have something you get after, and then it's just like, is it worthy? That's the other thing, is it's like, is it a worthy direction? So checking into that intuition, because I've learned by a lot of mistakes. So I thought, oh, this is a worthy mountain. I'm going to go climb it. And then you get to the top and you're like, oh, you're kind of like, lost a few more friends and you're a little bit more broken. And now what? Like, oh, yeah, maybe this wasn't the mountain. And so at your own hand, it's like you have a choice and you're saying, hey, I am making a choice right now. And what is next? Where am I going? what do I identify with that I've been carrying up to this point? Because I think a big thing is like identity, right? So if I'm a musician, I'm trying to be a rock star, that's my identity. And then when that was gone, it's like, oh, I'm dead. And that's a really big one, which is I've found real kinship in actually working with veterans because if you've been in the military, like that's your identity, and if you're all in on it, and then it changes, like your identity really changes. So I think that's a really big part of it. And then so figuring out what can you control, what's interesting, what's curious, what do you have with you that you can draw from, and maybe we can talk about that in a second, versus,
Yeah.
hey, this thing is just happening, and I really need to surrender into the change of it because it's happening.
Right. And I think surrender is really hard. We did a podcast episode. I want to say it's like the first or second episode we ever did because I was really struggling. And I can't say that surrender and I are best friends, but I was really struggling with the concept of surrender being very polarized, right? Either it's, Goonies never say die, right? Feeling like Mel Gibson in Braveheart, or you could tear me limb from limb, I'm not going to acquiesce. And then that also finding the flow of surrender, that trust in surrender or a place of acceptance. And it just felt like two completely different sides of the room. And I mean, I was on a quest to ask so many people this question. So I'm curious from your lens, not only in your experience, but also as a coach, like how do you either walk somebody to surrender, introduce the concept to them, have them shake hands or befriend surrender? Because that was always really a hard one for me.
Yeah, I think, well, as a coach, once somebody engages you as a coach, they are already on the journey towards doing that because one of the most powerful things about coaching that I have found is that I get to bear witness to somebody as they truly attempt to speak truth. And I
Right.
always find it interesting the dance between speaking the truth and speaking your truth, right? Because when someone says, "Hey, I'm speaking my truth," then it's like, okay, well, how well do you know yourself? And are you insane, right? And that's just part of the human experience. And as a coach, you're being transparent in terms of the energy flow. So in microphone world, in the music world, we talk about microphones that are transparent, right? They capture the essence of what that person is putting into there. And that's the same thing with the coach where, you want that energy flow to be circular and you're not interrupting that flow. And somebody gets to hear themselves tell their own story in a very safe environment. And then what's the most true will start to come out. Right. And then a lot of times, what's the most true is like, oh, I need to surrender to this. Because what happens is when somebody bears witness to you saying that, if you're in a clear environment, in a sober environment, then that truth really starts to resonate. And then people will get those kernels. And depending on where they are in their journey, like I was uncoachable for many years, but those kernels were like growing in me, right? And I think everybody has a different growth pattern for what they're actually going to surrender to. So I think intentionality, probably maturity. Are they wise? How much emotion is in there, right? So I know you and I have worked with people where they're just, it's a little bit of there's chaos and drama in there. And sometimes just to cool that down for clarity is also important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I also think that, as we're talking and we're talking about that concept of identity and, as things change, especially if we, swing the pendulum to really focusing on the ego death. Because I think the other one, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the other one where it's art at your own hand and you're like in the flow of it and you're like, okay, if you're painting, you're like, let's change colors, let's add a little more green, whatever we're doing here. I think that we can all be like, all right, I'm navigating that. It's the other one. It's that ego death where nothing feels like it's at your hand or in your control. So give us the bloody moment story. Like give us the like for you as you're okay, here I am. Like ego death is upon me, which again, Craig, I'm making the assumption that there was one, but it sounds like you have experienced several in your reinvention experiences. But I'm super curious, like, what does it look like? What does it feel like when you don't feel like you know who you are anymore and you're trying to find some semblance of control or what's interesting to you?
I started to drink a lot. that's like a big coping mechanism.
Yeah.
I'm 12 plus years sober at this stage, and that was a huge, just like, I kind of liken it to a race car driver, and you've been driving around the track and you're going for the championship, and you like your car wrecks, and then the company's like, all right, well, you're good, and you're still trying to like get in every car that you touch and just race around the world.
Mhm.
That's basically what's going on. Or like, so it was not, it was more chaotic than anything, and it happened in stages. I mean, I spent just a few years just I'd made enough money off my song that I just wandered around and just acted the fool for a bit on a walkabout. And then I had to figure out what to do for money. So it was just like a reinvention step at a time, taking it, like a little bit at a time. I was like eating snacks of reinvention without acknowledging it.
Yeah,
Right.
that's
I mean, honestly, if I could tell my 30-year-old self, it's like, dude, just take 6 months and go live in a yurt. Just leave and let go and stop worrying about it. Stop worrying about what you're supposed to be doing. Like there's just nothing you can do right now except for take care of yourself and get some perspective about what's real.
right. Where's that dance though? Where's that dance between learning to let go, right, the surrender, and finding what you can control?
It's a daily process. Like with any kind of process with meditation or yoga or any kind of religious process, it's like every single day you have to do the work. You have to like find the tools and ask yourself, where do you think you're going? And what are you struggling with? What actually can you not control?
Right.
It's like the ultimate serenity prayer, right? Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? Yeah, that's a poem for all alcoholics, but that's life. And learning what that is really important. And starting to understand your own ego is also really, really important. A lot of times it becomes more difficult for people who are high functioning,
Yep.
right? When you're just crushing it and then it's time to change. Because a lot of times, if you're crushing it in a domain, you like to be on top. And at some stage, it's like there's somebody younger, faster, more talented, more beautiful, whatever. And you have to adjust into the wisdom of letting go. And I think that's also an age thing, right? Because we can act like we're badass, but at some stage, you're 80 and not sprinting like you were, right? I mean, that's
Right. Right. Right.
I
Right.
think it's a difficult process and everybody's different in it, but it requires great care and a very sober and meticulous approach, and at the same time a sense of lightness about it.
Right, right, right. It's funny. So I've been working on the third book. I've shared this with you. And my book lady had me revisit the intro again. She's like, okay, hey, we really want to just like, you know, come out strong. I said, okay. Because the book is about taking a wrecking ball to your life. It's about reinvention. It's about like finding yourself once again, or at least who you are in this chapter, understanding that there's going to be other chapters to unfold. And I think that, when you talked earlier about having experience and saying, well, maybe this isn't the mountain. I think that that's particularly interesting. Like, how do we allow ourselves to, again, permission slip, if you will, play Goldilocks a little bit, figuring out what's too hot, too cold, just right in reinvention? Because if we knew, like, okay, I'm reinventing from Spider-Man to Batman, right? And then it's
Right.
like, okay, here is my direct path. Here's what I have to do. Here's the new color I'm going to wear, right?
Yeah.
But that's not exactly how reinvention works. So I'm curious, like, as you're on that journey and it's like, well, that's not my mountain. Well, that's not my mountain. How do you navigate that playing Goldilocks to find what is just right for this iteration of you?
I find that over time, handling the basics really, really well so that you are a healthy human being
Mm.
to then figure out how to make healthy decisions. So, what is the elegant next step? Just being sober, like my list every day is meditate, move, create. Like I put everything, all of my list of things to do, I just put in those buckets. And if I'm handling the basics really well, I tend to have a better vision about what I want in the future and what I'm doing to get there. The sort of value of envisioning 5 to 10 years out. Like if it what is it feeling great? Because the further out you can do that, the more it pulls you, but holding it light that it's like, hey, if I'm talking about 5 years out, like life happens, right? and to be open to the mystery. That's something that I've been like, hey, I'm just having faith that there's something out there that is much bigger and more beautiful than I could possibly imagine, because that's always what's happened. And by handling the basics, I'm grounded to be able to handle what actually happens in the moment. Because if you can make the elegant next step in the preparation, then what happens is that real opportunities and options show up for yourself. And
Right.
that's really, really important, because then it's like you can start to see the design parameters of your life. So then you can understand, what does reinvention look like within the context of your life? Because I was guilty of, after the band, of just ripping pavement up. Like, oh, okay, I'm just going to start over. I'm going to start over. I'll just do this thing now. I'll just do this thing now. And that's interesting, but it's not helpful, because it's like the dance between conserve and liberate, right? I mean, that's just the way societies work too. It's like there's some things you need to conserve: your energy, your money, your family relationships, those kinds of things. And there's some things you need to liberate, right? Hey, a new path forward, a new skill set, a new relationship, a new sense of being, those kinds of things. So I think it's a dance between being grounded and reaching for the stars. I mean, yoga's perfect for that, right? So you're grounding your feet into the earth, so you're sticking them way down there's roots, and then you're reaching as far up into the heavens as possible. And it's in that pulling is where the space happens.
Right. Well, and I want to come back to what you said about ripping up the pavement. And I love that phrase, because I think that there's some element of ripping up the pavement. There's some element, whether it's like, I've got to unearth all the patterns, the behaviors, the thoughts that got me to where I am that is not working for me right now. And then I also think that there's the ripping up the pavement of like trying, like, is this too hot? Is this too cold? Is this, just right? And I think that it's also interesting then when you overlay it with the lens of the high achiever. The high achiever wants to get it right out of the gate more often than not. Or
Right.
the high achiever, if not getting it right out of the gate, it feels like the high achiever will just rip up pavement, rip up pavement, rip up pavement to try and, like just hook in there. Because the high achiever, which is in large part who's listening to the podcast, like they are so driven, just
Yeah.
so driven, and often to the demise of themselves. So that tearing up of the pavement, like I'm sure that you need some level of that, but how do you know when to say like, hey, you're good?
Contemplation, quiet time, health, finding a good coach to talk through things with that's an accountability partner, building your kitchen cabinet so that as an executive, you have a group of people that will tell you the truth that you could communicate clearly with, so that if you are doing a reinvention, it's a healthy reinvention. It's a sustainable one, because I think that, you're talking to someone that I just like the challenge of reinventing things, right? I'd like the distraction of just like a new thing that took all of my energy, and then as soon as that was over, it's like, well, let's start another fire, right? And that's, I think there's a real balance, and there's no specific right way. Although I feel like there's just first principles around being a sober person, eating well, exercising, meditating and praying, trying to have good relationships with people around you, being honest with yourself. That's really difficult. Finding the right coach, work through it, be patient, ask the real questions of yourself, and then be willing to listen to the real answers. Like it's there's no shortcuts here. I can give some techniques like, hey, if you're reinventing yourself, especially if it's semi-forced, take an inventory of your skill set. Hey, what do you know how to do? Like just write all of the things down you know how to do, and then you'll figure out how do those actually translate into other domains. I mean, I've part of my reinvention was I translated being able to produce music on a computer to doing post production on a computer, right? Because it was manipulation of sound and wave files and all kinds of stuff, which led to learning how to do multimedia stuff, because it's still manipulation of media, right? So there's nitty gritty stuff like that we can get into, but I think at the end of the day, it's like the having really clear first principles of how you operate, having good people around you, having a good coach, and then listening to the truth, and then
Yeah.
following through on that.
Yeah, something you're talking about, I think that we dismissed because it's easy to dismiss, and that's think time. And
Yeah.
I mean, any of the titans out there, which again, there's so many different ways to measure success in life. But more often than not, whether you're a monk on a mountain or you're running a Fortune 500 company, when you talk to them, many people build think time into their day
Yeah.
or into their week or into the month. Like there's an intention around it. So you bring up a good point, Craig, where are you taking time to think? And then are you taking time to listen to what's coming up for you?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure, like back in, your bloody nose story, back when we're face down in the dirt, how much listening were you doing when you were falling off the cliff? A lot of times we don't,
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I mean, listening,
right?
trying to be mature. I mean, it's so interesting that we're talking about reinvention and complexity and sophistication. And it's like the basics really are the ones to do it. I think it also too, it helps to really think through what reinvention actually is. Like what are you reinventing?
Mm.
Right? Is it a relationship? Is it your relationship to work? Is it a money thing? Is there a creative path? Or because I lived in Los Angeles and that was just people just reinvented themselves all the time, but it was just more performative. Like, look at me, I'm now a whatever. And you're like, oh, hey, ninja, like you have your outfit on today, right?
Right, 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 right.
So American too, right? Just come on over. You could be anything you want. Okay, well, I was
Anything,
this last
whatever you want,
decade and now I'm,
whatever you want to be. But okay, so at first we're talking about, one path of reinvention being art at your own hand. Then
hmm
the second path of reinvention kind of being like, well, this is not quite at your own hand, and here you go over a cliff. You're navigating something that you didn't necessarily ignite. Also, what comes to mind is a third path of reinvention, which is largely what I'm talking about in the new book about, and the language I'm using is taking a wrecking ball to your life. But Craig, I'd love your lens on what happens when, and maybe you've experienced this, maybe your clients have experienced this, but what happens in that third path when you're doing all the things, you've achieved all the things, you checked all the boxes in who you thought you were supposed to be, and you look around and you're like, well, this isn't it. And maybe your bank account says it's it. Maybe your title says it's it. Maybe, the team says it's it. Maybe the white picket fence says that it's it. But in your gut, you kind of just know, well, this isn't it. And like, I don't know, like, shit, if this isn't it, then what is?
right.
Super curious of your lenses on that. Like when you know that you've got to reinvent. Like you could go through the motions. No one's going to pay you less, call you a less title. No one's leaving the picket fence. You could keep on keeping on, but like in your gut, you know that that's no longer the truth, and it's time to reinvent. How do you navigate that?
The question is, what are you taking the wrecking ball to in your life? How big is that ball and how hard are you going to swing it?
Right.
Because and you're talking to somebody who swung a wrecking ball multiple times. And what do you, because wrecking balls, they knock things down, right?
Yep.
So
Take it all down.
what are you going to knock down and for what reason?
Right.
Because, we've seen people like, they call it the midlife crisis, whatever. Okay, I've done this. And then they're like, okay, well, I'm just going to wipe the slate clean. And they go and they just start the whole thing over. Right? And then there's other people involved, right? And then there's like, oh, well, wait a minute, like you just wiped the whole whiteboard clean, but couldn't you have done like half of it and kept the good part, right? Like you made it in your career, but like it doesn't mean you need to go and start a whole other life and family and talk about okay, well, this is actually what I really am. You know,
Right.
and that's an extreme version of it, and we all have different circumstances to make change. But I would just say, how accurate are you with your ball, and what are you wrecking?
Right. 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 I mean, I found for myself like making a change to everything that had existed in my life. And again, it coincided with the pandemic. So
Yep.
giddy up, everything was about to change. I mean, I changed my location, I changed my marital status, I changed the
Yep.
way that I operated my business, everything. I mean,
Right.
everything had changed. And that was humbling. It was really humbling to have, in many ways, taken a wrecking ball to everything that I once knew. And it wasn't a house of cards. What I built was real. But I also looked around and said, this isn't it. And that's
Right.
scary. right? That like,
Yeah.
well, but on the outside, it looks like it. I built this to be exactly what it is. It is, paint by number, exactly how it's supposed to be. And this is just not me. And what I found was, and it took time, a whole lot of time, but
Right.
that the truth lied in the rubble and the
Right.
rebuilding, and not in the phoenix rising again sort of rebuilding, but just in a building what was true and beautiful
Right.
for this next iteration. And also learning that there's going to be so many different chapters in our life. And
Yeah.
the what doesn't help us sometimes is holding on, like that death grip, holding on to how we think that it should be.
Right.
So I'm curious, like in that third way where you
Hmm.
just know that this isn't it. And there's something more. I mean, even, in your path, right? We, went from all the flavors of music, and then you were consulting. And I would say are consulting. And also for a variety of different industries, right? Which
Right.
they benefited so much from your perspective. And then I don't know if it was a this isn't right, but it was also a this, I want something more, and then adding coaching into your consulting repertoire.
So it's interesting. So the this isn't it and the way things are supposed to be. That's a really big one. So I carried that in the music industry of I had a very clear vision of how I thought things were supposed to be.
Mm.
I'm going to be here by here. This is how it's going to be. I'm going to na na na. And then I compared myself to my colleagues who became household names, which is like you have to be kind of insane to be in that business to think like that. But nothing ever lined up with the way I thought it was supposed to be.
Okay.
And it took a long time to understand like expectations are really dangerous of the way things are supposed to be, right? So it comes down to first principles of like how clear are you with yourself about what it is you think things are supposed to be. And you and I, as coaches, we work on that because people be like, oh, no, 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 no. And you're like, well, let's actually go further underneath this. Well, actually, this is what you're saying over here. And I've
Sure.
been shocked a couple times about, well, what do you love about music? And I was just like, no, 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 no. No. Oh, actually, I like the vibration and hanging out with people. I was like, well, that actually sounds really simple, right? And you're over here like, it's gonna be 80,000 people. And you're like, no, no. It's like, well, what? And then the other thing too about the wrecking ball, and everybody is different and has to go through a different level of change. It's like, what are you willing to sacrifice, right? Because what is proper sacrifice?
Right.
Right? As a musician, you have to sacrifice your time and energy to be a really good musician. As a parent, you are sacrificing your so much of your life to raise your children, and if you don't do that, then there's problems. And so I think the wrecking ball is like I need to sacrifice this in order to make space for this. And then it's like this is the way I think it was supposed to be. And it's just like, well, how clear are you in all of that process? Because the more clear you can be in it, the more it's going to be just probably less chaotic, And you and I both know life is chaotic. Like
Mhm.
sometimes you just have to go, you know what? Time to cut bait and go. Right? I mean, that's just the way it is. Like I was married previously. I've been through so many different wrecking ball scenarios. As you can tell, I've come to a place where I'm like controlled detonation, right? Better than just detonation, right?
Right.
I
That's a
think
good
that would
point.
be yeah, because the reinvention is about like, hey, how do you evolve and how can you be the best version and have a really great life and be healthy and have great relationships and loves. And I'm into that. And I would love to be helpful for people to make those changes and those navigations as gracefully as possible, as positively as possible.
Right. And sometimes it's messy as hell, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes it is a wrecking ball. Sometimes it's a controlled detonation. Sometimes we're just a master blaster blowing all sorts of shit up. Like I think that one of the things is going back to that space of identity, like knowing who we are and letting go of this story of who we were supposed to be,
Yeah.
right? Like, yeah, I was probably not the size audiences that you've experienced, but standing on stage and there's everybody and they want me to, meet them afterwards or sign the book, da 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 da. And that felt great, right? It was wonderful. Fly here, fly there. And I felt, okay, well, but what about over here where my daughter's growing and now she's got interests and I want to be there. And it didn't feel like a failure to say, well, this is a better use of my time. But to your point, I knew that I'm going to have to let go of this. And the interesting part was that it didn't feel like a sacrifice. It felt like the next right step.
Right.
Right? Because I think that sometimes when we do that death grip holding on, which I definitely have navigated 100% before I took a wrecking ball to everything that once was, is that in that holding on so tight, a consequence of living life the way that I thought that I was supposed to be, the consequence became me.
Right.
And one might say that's too high of a price to pay, logically. But I think for achievers, it's something we can control, right? If everybody else is okay, if everything looks good, if the business is running, if, everyone's excelling, well, I'll just lay on the grenade. And you do that enough times that it just kind of becomes what's normal. Until, at least for me, I thought there was an important question. And the question was, would you want that for your daughter? And I'd love to attribute who shot it my way, probably a mentor of mine. Would you want that for your daughter? And it was good enough. It was great. It was good enough. And all the markings, right? When you come up with a checklist, okay, bank account looks great, accolades, like all those things. And I thought, I'd want it to look a little different for her. And so that became an inspiration behind the next chapter, the
Right.
next path. I didn't reinvent from Spider-Man to Batman and be like, okay, we're just going to go over here. It was, to your point, what's that next right thing?
Yeah.
It's just that what's just real and true and what's right next. And in my experience, and you use the words ego death, and I hadn't thought about that from that lens, but I think I was really clear on knowing who I was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But in reinvention, there was no paint by number.
Right.
There could have been. It would have been super alluring to, like, as you alluded to before, throw myself into the next project, the next thing that had to be done. And instead, it was like a choice, like, hey, you want another paint by number, or do you want a blank canvas? And as terrifying as that place of reinvention was, I said, well, give me the canvas, give me that blank canvas, and we're going to figure it out. So, like you had said earlier, sometimes there were mountains that was just not my mountain.
Yeah.
The
Find your
paint,
mountain. Right.
paint
Find
over.
your mountain.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So when we talk about some of the key ingredients, because I know I can't keep you on here forever, we got to wrap it up. But I'm curious, some of those key ingredients for reinvention, like what would you say are the biggest takeaways for someone to put in their pocket as they walk away from this episode?
Take an assessment. Is this one of those ones? It's like things are just happening. COVID, the economy fell apart. There's a disease, something, you got fired, and then figure out how much of that is going on versus how much you're pondering something that needs to be changed. And then go through some quiet time, find a coach, start to assess your skill set, start to itemize what it is about what you expected it to be that it is not, and start to make those notes and start to have a dialogue with yourself. Find a good coach, somebody to talk to that doesn't judge you. And this is, this, when I talk to people who are super busy, go, I don't know what a coach does. I'm like, all right, you're super busy. You're really jaded. How many people do you have in your life that twice a month they'll listen to you for an hour and they won't judge you, and they'll just reflect back what you said. They'll ask great questions. They'll help you like learn what your truth is, and they'll be accountable to you, but they're not going to judge you. Like, oh, actually, nobody does that for me. Of course, right? Humans need humans. So go find a human being that you can reflect with safely, and be sane. Take care of the basics really well, and then from there, try to figure out what your journey is and take it in stepwise motion. And if you're going to take a wrecking ball to your life, just figure out what are you clearly sacrificing, because there's always a sacrifice involved, and sacrifice involves pain on some level or discomfort, and there's always discomfort and change. Not always, but that's part of the fun, right? Is the discomfort.
Right, 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 right,
Maybe
right.
that's not the right word. Maybe you can tell I've changed a lot where I'm like,
Right. Giddy up. If you're not comfortable, you're actually pointing in the right direction.
the
So
truth comes out in the
congratulations.
wash, right?
It's true. It's true. Craig, I can't thank you enough for being with us today.
Yeah.
Tell everybody where they can find you on the internets. Where are you hanging out?
Aimupward.com is my coaching business because I believe in aiming upward. You can find me on Instagram as Craig Honeycutt, the Craig Honeycutt. There is a Craig Honeycutt who is a very famous makeup artist in New York. So if you see me on guitars, you'll know it's me. If you see supermodels and makeup boys, then you'll know it's the other Craig Honeycutt. He's amazing, actually. And then the band Everything. So I'm still an active musician. So that's a reinvention of relationship to things, right? So reinvention often is our relationship to things.
Right. How it fits in your life now.
Hmm.
Right. So instead of 220 days a year out on the road, it's like here's how I'm reinventing my relationship to music.
Yeah,
Cool. Cool.
perfect.
Well, see you in the parking lot at school, my friend. Thank you so much for joining
Absolutely. Bailey, Bailey.
us. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Mindrise Podcast. Check out our show notes for details and to get in on the latest at Mindrise. Visit us on Instagram at the Mindrise